This video will be primarily focused on qualitative designs. We spent quite a bit of time working on quantitative data, sampling designs, research designs for quantitative methods. And this part has to do with qualitative, which really is more focused on small groups or learning a great deal about a particular topic, very much in-depth view of information. They can be divided up into several different types of studies. Overall, they tend to be focused on single subjects, where the purpose is to learn a great deal about one to a few people, or a characteristic of those one to few people. And these people are not average. And what that means is if you look at the normal curve, quantitative studies tend to focus on large groups of what is normal for most people. Qualitative tends to focus on one end or the other of that normal curve, and they will have very unique characteristics. There will be outliers, there will be non-normal distributions. The researchers developed something called a baseline, and basically what that does is that allows us to see for this unique characteristic, this unique person, what a normal behavior is for them. Even though they are not part of a normal distribution of the group, they do still have a normal behavior for themselves. So we have to figure out what is going to be normal for this person, because then we're going to provide a treatment to that person and see what happens to them. So how is this done? Well, there's a number of observations that have to be conducted. So if you can think about, let's say we have one person that we're particularly interested in, and that person really has a lot of problems behaving in class. Well, we want to know what problems they're having, when those problems occur, where they occur, who's around them, what time of day, what time of year, all that information, and that's the context of that. And once we establish the context around that, then we can start to manipulate one of the variables at a time to see if we can get their behavior to change. And to illustrate this point, I have this example in here. I used to have a physics teacher, and I use that word loosely. He was working with students, and we were studying the impact of changing conditions on the swing of the pendulum. So each time she would have them change the length of the rod and the mass. And the length of the rod is the distance between the point where the pendulum swings and the mass itself. And their results never came out correctly because she was having two variables change at the same time. She never knew which one was the right one. Well, research is the same way. You can't change two variables at the same time because you don't know which one is going to have an effect on that subject. So, the first type of study we're going to look at is something called an A-B design, or also called a two-phase design. And we have a no intervention baseline and then an intervention phase. Now, basically what happens is it looks something like this. But I want to go back to this slide for just a second. The problem with this type of design is a couple of different events can occur, and those fall into the general category of validity. And under validity, there's two things called history and maturation. History is all the other things that happen around us that affect the way that we respond to something. And maturation is the things within inside of us that change as we become smarter, make different decisions, things like that. Those two events, history and maturation, can affect this A-B design because, as you know, over a period of several months, lots of things can happen to us which will change the way we respond to problems, or in this case, treatments. So let's look at this. All the notes that I have on here you can download, and at the bottom of those, if you print it off as notes pages, you can see my notes associated with this. But basically, this chart depicts an intervention aimed at increasing study time. So we developed under A baseline of how much time this kid spends studying. So on Monday, 15 minutes, Wednesday, 30 minutes, Friday, 60 minutes, Monday he goes back down. So then we provide a treatment at point B, and then we want to see what happens after that. And you'll notice after that treatment, the amount of time that he spends studying begins to increase. You'll also notice that we didn't do it for just a week like we did the baseline, because it's not enough for our treatment to have an effect for a week. We want it to be a sustained treatment or a sustained effect for a long period of time. So we continue to measure this for several weeks afterwards. So that's basically it's an A-B design. The next one is called an ABA design, and it has an extra step to it, so that there's a no intervention baseline, an intervention phase, and then a no intervention withdrawal phase. And the reason that we do this is because we want to make sure that what we did to that person really did have an effect on them. So we remove that treatment to see if their behavior goes back the other way. And then sometimes another B will be added back in. And this has to do, this part about adding that B back in, so that would be an AB design, has to do with ethics. Basically, what happens is if the treatment you provide makes a significant difference in their behavior, then you want to be able to make sure that they get it again. So here's a chart that depicts somebody who's working with a client on empathy. This person started out with this empathy scale that they weren't really showing empathy the way that they felt like they should have. And the next phase, after treatment was provided, we decide to see, are they able to show more empathy or recognize more empathy? So after a treatment, this begins to start to go up. Then we remove the treatment at A, and their ability to show empathy or recognize empathy goes back down. So this is an AB design. Now, as I was saying, if providing, in this case, empathy is an ethical thing to do, or teaching somebody to have empathy, then we'd want to reintroduce that and return the treatment back to it. What we want to look for in these studies, in any kind of qualitative study, is a very thorough description of the subject, the conditions, and the treatment. Because we want to be able to replicate it, we have to make sure that we completely understand the conditions under which this treatment is occurring. The methodology tends to be very long in a qualitative study because the methodology has the treatment in it. And for us to fully understand what has occurred in this qualitative study, we have to fully understand what was done to the person. The results section should give some kind of explanation as to why their treatment worked, or in some cases why it didn't work, and a good description of limitations as well. Meaning that because it's such a small study, there's such a small group of people, that's going to be a limitation as to whether or not you can generalize it. And that is the one big problem with this design, is you cannot generalize from this to something else. There is also another type called a multiple baseline design, and these work like an AB, but instead of having one person, behavior, situation, we have several. The treatment is still critical and should be richly described, and there's one of three things that can happen. One, a person might have several behaviors we're trying to treat. It may be one child with a problem acting out, a problem with aggressive behavior, and a problem with impulse. Or it may be one person who has one behavior in many situations. A child has impulse control problems in the classroom, in the cafeteria, and at home. So we have different points at which we're going to start. And we might have one behavior, impulse control, that's occurring in several people. So we can see if our treatment not only has an effect on one person, but has an effect on several at one time. You have an article that's available to you in the course content area called White Noise, and this is going to show you an example of what this would look like. But basically, this is it. This is an AB. So we have a treatment A. We have a baseline with the treatment B. Then we start another group where we have a baseline, and we start the treatment with that group, and we can see the treatment goes down. And then we reestablish where we are after the treatment. So there's just another example of what this looked like. The article called White Noise also gives you another real-world example of what this would look like. That ends this video, and we'll go on to the next one.